So in this video we're going to cover how we set up a Blazor server app that in real time will display what is in the database. So just quickly, what I mean by that is that you can see we have some information here. We have John, who is a manager. We have Henrik, who is a student. And right now that is coming from our MS SQL database. And normally when we create and we edit data, we are going to do it over in the UI so that we manipulate the data that is in the database. But in this case, it's actually the other way around. So when we edit something in the database, it will instantaneously update over in our UI. So just to show a quick example, if we say John 2 and I hit enter, you can see that it instantly updated on our website. And also if we go and include a new person, so let's say John again, and this time we have a John who is maybe a driver. And when I hit enter, you can see that we get the new John in our list. It is a very powerful feature when you have something to do with a dashboard, for example, but you could use it in so many cases. But in this video, we're going to create everything from scratch, the database from scratch, set up entity framework so that we can create a table in our database. Then we're going to use a class called SQL Table Dependency, which is actually the class that is listening to our database and is going to notify us when there is changes in the database. And after that, we're going to use SignalR. It might not be necessary to use, but I think it's a smart way to broadcast the changes to every user that is logged into the website or that is just actually displaying the website on their computer. So if you're not familiar with SQL Table Dependency and with SignalR, then you can learn the two core concepts in this video. But I think the first thing we will do is to go and create a new Blazor server app. So just open Visual Studio and then we hit create a new project. And from in here, we want to choose the Blazor server app. So we hit next and let's call this for a real-time data app. And then we can just say next. In our case, we're just going to use the .NET 6 framework. I know that there's a .NET 7 right now, but I want to use the long-term support version. You can choose a .NET 7, then you just have to select some other NuGet packages when we install them. And I actually don't know if the syntax is a little bit different, so I'll just stick to the .NET 6 version and say create. And actually before we start coding, I just want to say to you that I have all the code in my blog, so you don't really have to sit and code along in this video. You can do it, but you can just go and copy and paste it from my blog. I will also set a download link for this exact project that we're going to create so that you can just go and download it. But the first thing we will do is to go and right click on our project because we want to install some NuGet packages. So click on the manage NuGet packages. We then want to go to browse and we actually want to download entity framework. And as you can see, I already have them here. So it's this Microsoft.entity framework core. That is the first NuGet package that we want to download. And we want to choose a version that match the .NET framework that we're using. So in this case, I was not using the .NET 7. But if you're using .NET 7 and want to try that, then you have to choose the .NET 7 version. I'll just choose the newest .NET 6. And then I just want to install and say I accept. And when that is installed, I also want to install the Microsoft.entity framework core.tools NuGet package. And what this is doing is that it enables these commands. So like we can add a migration and we can update the database. And that's exactly what we want. So I want to choose the 6th version also and say install and I accept. I actually also think we have to install this Microsoft.entity framework core.SQL server because we're going to use a MS SQL server. So let's also choose the newest .6 version and accept. So when that is installed, we can go and create our database context file. So in the data folder, I want to right click and say add a new item and I want to call it app db context and make sure that it is a class that you're creating. So we want to say add. So the first thing we will do is to extend this class and we will do that from the db context. And as you can see, it suggests that we use the db context from the entity framework package. So let's just hit enter on that. And on the first line, I want to go and create a connection string to our database. So in this case, I just copy and pasted the old one I have, but instead of calling this company database, then let's call it company database 2. And next up, we want to add the table to our database, which is called employee. and we're going to take it from our employee model that we're going to create in just a moment. And then the last thing we want to do is to override our on configuring method, because then we want to use the options builder to say that we want to connect to a SQL server. So now let's go to the employee, hit Alt Enter, and then we want to say we want to generate the type employee. So we want to generate class employee in a new file, and now you can see it just added it over in our data folder. So I'll just open the file, and let's just make some extra space and say prop and hit tab twice. This is really just a shortcut to make a new property, but we want to make it an int, that's fine. And then we want to call this an ID, and let's just hit Control D twice so we copy the line 2 times, but we actually want to make a string this time, so we can just copy this also to this one, and then we want to create this as a name, and we also want to say that this is a title. So let's just save the file, and also want to save the app DB context. And the next thing we will do is to go to Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio to create the new database that we want to create. So let's just expand this, and let's go and say that we want to create a new database, and this one should be called Company Database 2. And next up we want to go to the options tab, and this is actually a very important step because else it will not work. We need to scroll a bit down, and then we need to say that the broker enabled should be true, like this. So when you enable the broker, you actually allow us to listen to the database after changes. So now we can go and say okay, and I'll just close this one and minimize this, and now we have our new database with no table inside it. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and now when our DB context and our model is set up, we should be able to create the new table in our database. So just go down to Package Manager Console, then we want to type add migration, and let's give it a name. I'll just call this init and hit enter. So it looked like it created the script that will create the table. So the next thing we will do is just to say update database, and when it says that that is done, let's go back to the database then and update, open the tables, and now we can see we have our employee table. So let's just right click this, say edit top 200 rows, and you can see we don't have any rows yet. So let's just add manually, let's add John and say he's a manager, and we want to add Henrik, who is a student. So now we have our employee table with some data inside. So the next step would be to just fetch the data and show it on our website. So let's go to Visual Studio again and just close this migration file. We then want to go to Pages and to our index razor page, and let's just go and remove the 3 lines here because we still want the page to be the front page, and we also want a title, but let's call this for live data instead. And I think just to learn one thing at a time, we will first go and display the data on our website. And when we have done that, we want to look at the SQL Table Dependency and see how that works. And then finally, when we know how that works, we want to use the SignalR to actually update the new data on our website. So the first code I have put in here is a for each loop that is going to for each our employees list and actually just loop through them and display the name and the title. I think I'll just zoom in a bit. And next up we want to add the code section so that we can create some code on our razor page or in our .razor file. And the first thing I will do is to actually create the employees list. So it's just an empty list that we're going to initialize. And just so we can use the model that we created, we're going to use the real-time data app.data folder so that it knows where the employee is. Next, we want to override the onInitialized async. So that's basically just what's going to be executed when the page is loading for the first time. And I think we will just cut right through it because we're going to create a employee service that will have a method called getAllEmployees. And the way we want to manage that in our Razor file is that we want to inject the employee service. So we need to go and create this employee service now. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a services folder where we will include the employee service. So over in our Solution Explorer, I want to right click and say add a new folder, and we will call this services. And inside our services, we want to create a new file. So we say new item, and we want to call this employee service. And first of all, we want to include our app.db context. So I'll just call it db context, and it automatically going to use the data folder. And next up, we want to create the method that gets all the employees. It will be a async method that is returning a task where we're going to return the list of employees, which makes sense because we want to get all employees. And then we want to use the DB context to get all the employees from our employee table. And an important step is also to include this as no tracking, because else it somehow mess up the database call that we're going to send. If you don't include this, then if you make a breakpoint and when you try to get some new information from the database, it will just fetch some old information instead. So it is a very important thing to include. And then finally, we're going to make it to a list where we say that it should do it async. So we also have to say that it should await it. So I actually think right now, if we're going to save this and also save the index.razor, that we can go and test this. So let's try and run the application to see if it works. So I actually do get an error, and I think this is because we don't have a constructor inside our employee service. So let's just try and make that and see if that works. So now inside our employee service file, I have included this empty constructor. So let's try and see if it works now. And we do actually get the same error, but now I found out what the problem is. It is that we can just close this. We have to go to our program.cs file, and before we can inject it to our .razor file, we need to add it as a singleton. So let's go and just hit Control D on this line so that we copy the weather forecast service that was default in this project. And then we want to include the employee service, just like this. And let's hit Alt Enter so that we can say that we want to use the service folder. So let's try and test this again. And it's actually okay inside our employee service that we created this constructor because we're going to use it later on. But let's go and test it. And now we can see we get the data from the database. So now when that is done, let's go and find out what SQL Table Dependency is and how it works. So let's just close the application again. So first of all, to use the SQL Table Dependency class, we need to go and install the NuGet package. So again, let's go to our project, say manage NuGet packages, and let's type SQL Table Dependency. And then it's actually this yellow icon that we want to choose. And we just want to choose the latest version. So install that and say I accept. And now we have the latest version of the SQL Table Dependency. So let's go back to our employee service. So the idea is to say that when we create a new instance of our employee service, which we are doing in the index.razor file, then we want to make a connection, or actually a listener, to our database by using the SQL Table Dependency. So first of all, I want to include this property called private read only, and it is the SQL Table Dependency class that we're going to use. And we have to say that it should listen to our employee model. And then I want to call this underscore dependency. And what you might notice is that it also included the table dependency.sql client. So it's just to make sure that if this gives you an error, then you might have to insert this line. And I also want to include a connection string to our database because the SQL Table Dependency has to know the connection string also. So now that we know what we're going to use, let's go and initialize these things in the constructor so that every time we make a new instance of this employee service, it will run the constructor and set up the SQL Table Dependency. So just like this, we want to say the underscore connection string is equal to our connection string. You might want to get it from another place, but just to keep this project simple, I will just put it directly in the file. And then we also want to initialize our underscore dependency, where we say it should be a new instance of our SQL Table Dependency that is targeting the employee model. We then want to give it our connection string and say that it should look for the employee table. So now we can go and set up the listener. So we say underscore dependency and say when there is changes, so on change, then we want to run this method. And this is just the syntax to do that. So this is actually the listener that is going to be set up. So every time there is happening some new things in our employees table, then the changed method will execute. And we're going to make the changed method in just a moment. The last thing we will do is also to say that this underscore dependency should start, because else it will not start listening before we say that it should actually start. So now let's go and hit Alt Enter on this changed and say generate method changed. So if you scroll a bit down, we can see now that it have integrated the changed method. And just to test if it works, let's go and just say that it should make a int called value to 0. And then let's set a breakpoint here. So there really should not be any more to it than this SQL table dependency that we're going to create it. And we say onChanged. And when it changed, we will go inside the changed method. And at last you want to say that it should start. And all this code inside our constructor is of course being run when we inside our Razor file injected, so that we're going to create a new instance of this employee service. So let's try to save all our files and say that we want to test the application. So the application is still working, and if we just make sure that we have our breakpoint, then let's go to our database, and actually I want to set it side by side here, just like this. And I want to make sure we're inside our company database too, and inside our employee, and we actually have it open already. So if I now say John number 2, you can see that it actually hit the breakpoint in our changed method. So now we can confirm that the SQL table dependency is working and it's listening to our database. So every time we make some changes, it will hit our method. So let's just hit continue, and I think we have to do it twice maybe. Sometimes you have to do it twice. I actually don't know why. But as we can see now, if we go back to the website, it has not changed, but it noticed that there is a difference in our table now, and that is actually just the job of the SQL table dependency. But to actually display the new information, we have to use SignalR, or I actually don't know if you have to use it. I think you could do it in some other way also. I have seen some headlines to some other videos where they say that they do it without SignalR, but in this video we will walk through how we're going to do it with SignalR. So let's just close the application again, and let's minimize our database. So to use SignalR, we need to set up some things first. First, we will need to go and download a NuGet package again, and then we want to set it up inside our program.cs file, because what we're going to do is that we want to create a new hub, which is basically the place that will broadcast the changes to the UI on every user that is currently on the website. Because what people do when they visit the website, then they're going to connect to the hub so that our server know who is connected to the hub, and so it knows who it should push the changes to. But we will just take it one step at a time. So first of all, let's go and install the NuGet package. And this NuGet package should be the Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.SignalR.Client. So it's this one. And again, we only want to install the .NET version that we have installed. So in this case, I will install the newest .NET 6 version and say install, and I accept. So next we will go to the program.cs file just to configure the SignalR. And the first thing we will include is this add response compression. You don't really have to understand what this is doing. It's just compressing the communication in a way so that SignalR understands it, and so the communication is optimized. And when you include this code, it will automatically include the ASP core response compression. So the next thing we will do is to scroll down just under our app where we built the app. And here we actually just want to say that it should use the response compression. So we add the feature to our service, and then when we build the app, we will say that it should also use it. And the last thing we will have to do in our program.cs file is to scroll down just under the map Blazor hub. Here we're going to say what hub we're going to use, and we're of course going to create this employee hub. And when you do that, we also want to specify a endpoint for the hub. So over in our Solution Explorer, I want to create a new folder. So we say add new folder, and we want to say hubs. And again, we want to create a new file in here. So we say new item, and then we want to specify the name, which is employee hub. And it's a class, so it's okay. We say add. So for this class to understand SignalR and understand that it should act as a hub, we have to extend it. And we're going to extend it with the hub class. And you can see we again have the Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.SignalR. So we're just going to select that and hit enter. And inside this hub, we actually only want to have one method, and that should be a method that refreshes the employees on our website. So I just created this method, which is a public async method that is returning a task, and it's called refresh employees. And basically what this will do is that it will take one parameter, which is a list of employees, and it will actually just put it down inside our send async method. And basically what this line of code is doing is that it's going to say that we want to target the clients that is currently available on this hub, and we do want to target them all. And then we want to send this request out where if you ask for the refresh employees name, it's actually just, it's not really a method this is just to reference what you're going to receive of data. So every people that is logged in and want to have this refresh employees is going to receive this variable, which is just the new list of the new employees that is going to be sent to the UI. So the idea here is that this refresh employees method is going to be called every time the database have some changes. And now when I sit and look at this, I actually don't think I actually used the hub inside the project that I created before, because what I'm doing is actually just calling this directly inside our employee service. But this is also just to explain you what a hub is and how you can use it, and actually just the idea behind it. So the thing we actually want to do is to go to our employee service, and then up in our constructor we can actually dependency inject our hub directly to this employee service. So the way we do that is by using the interface iHub context, and then also up here we want to make a private property so we can use the context of the hub inside our employee service. So just at the top of our employee service, you can see it already knows what we want to do. So just hit tab. So we want to take this dependency injection, which is called context, and save it into our local variable so that we can go and use it inside our changed method. So when there is a new change in the database, we want to get the employees once again, because we know that there have been a change, and because we await this, we also have to make this async. And then the next thing we will do is to send these employees out to everyone that listens to this refresh employees, just like you saw in the hub before. So it will actually just send this out to everyone who is currently a client inside our employee hub. And as you saw in the program.cs file, this employee hub is mapped inside our program.cs as a hub. So first of all, we just want to hit Alt Enter on this because we also want to use the hubs folder. So the last thing we have to do now is actually just to go to our Razor page and then listen to this endpoint, because then it will map it to our employee hub. And as you saw in our employee service, if we scroll a bit down, you can see we actually use the employee hub here as our hub context. So when we send this async out as the name is refreshed employees, then it will send it out to the employee hub or to every user that is connected to the employee hub. And that's actually why we don't have to use the employee hub itself, but we can go and use it if we want to. But I just think this is a most simple way to connect to the hub and to send the data out to the clients. So let's make sure that this is saved, and let's make sure this is also saved, and let's go to the index.razor page, and then we actually want to work inside our uninitialized async method. And the first line here is actually already set, so that's okay, because we just fetch the employees when the page is loaded. And when we inject the employee service, it also starts our listener. So the first thing we will do inside our .razor file is to add this hub connection. And if we hit Alt Enter, we can see that we can use the Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR client. So we just want to include that. And next up, we want to build the hub connection. So we use the hub connection builder, and then we want to specify what URL we want to connect to. And that should be the endpoint that we specified in our program.cs. So we can just go and say that we want to navigate to it to absolute URI, and then we also want to include this navigation. So the way we can include that is just by inject the navigation manager and say that we want to use it as navigation. So now we can say navigation to absolute URI and target the endpoint to our hub. So that is the way that we connect a client to the hub. So when we open the website and we come into this page, it will automatically connect us to the employees hub now, which means that when we send some information out to a specific hub, we can now see that this user is inside the hub. So the next thing we will do is to set this hub connection and say on, because then we can go and specify that when we send some information to this hub that has the name refresh employees, then we should get a list of employees, and then we can just go and say that this new list of employees should be equal to the employee list that actually display the content on our website. And at last, it will invoke async. The state has changed, and this is just so the UI know that something new has happened. You have to update the UI, else we will not be able to see the changes. So basically what this do is just to listen to if there is come any refresh employees message that is sent out to the hub, and if a new refresh employees message has come, then we will expect that there is some new employees that we have to take care of. So the final thing we have to do is just to start this connection. So we say start async, and then I actually think we should be good to go. So if we just hit Ctrl S to save, and let's go and run the application, we still get the data from the database. So let's open the database and try to change this to just John. And now you can see that it updated, and that is basically how you do it. So let's go and say the manager 2, and you can see that's also updating. And if we go and add a new line, it was John again, who was a driver, and let's hit enter. You can see it also refreshed the list. I think that the most important thing here is just the SQL Table Dependency and the SignalR. If you understand these two things, then I think you can come a long way. And this is of course just one out of many ways that you can use it. You can actually also use it with JavaScript, so you don't have to use Blazor to do it. But if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and else I'll just see you in the next video.